Definitely third episode of the day because the robe has opened more and more. Oh, there it is. It gave out. All right, robe open. It's a Nine Inch Nails shirt I got from concert many years ago. Great show. Very cool. Trent's always putting on a good show. Down in that prime, we saw it in the prime real estate of Montreal, the Bell Center, I remember. I think Queens of the Stone Age was opening. It was the Ghost Tour. I don't know if any of you know Nine Inch Nails, but let's talk about real estate. It's a hell of a thing that I feel incredibly lucky that I was given the opportunity and, quite frankly, the means to get into the market of real estate when I did, which was 15 years ago. I would, first of all, not be able to now, especially as a single father, afford it to get into the market now, but I don't think I would ever be able to afford it. The sacrifices on lifestyle I would have to make at this point if I needed to buy property would be unreal. Real estate is nuts, and it's been nuts for 30 years, at least in Canada. The rise in values of homes has made it so that we hear all the news reports, no Canadian can really afford to get into housing without having an extreme top 5% level of income or top 2% level of income at this point. It's just crazy. I rented my first apartment in 2002. My summer of my first year in university. I rented my first apartment, which was a hole in the wall, a block from McGill campus. It was a 400 square foot apartment that basically was a tiny bathroom, a little kitchenette, and then a room on which on one side I had a single fold out trundle, but like literally my sister had a bed back in our house in Mississauga that had the top part of the bed and then a trundle bed. I don't know if you guys know what a trundle bed is, but it's one of those beds you can pull out from under a bed, unfold the legs, and make like basically a second twin or single bed. All I had was the trundle bed portion. In that apartment, I had a table and a chair and a desk. On the table, I had my PlayStation and a TV. And that's pretty much all I had room for. There was a small balcony that I never used. I mean, it was really the smallest thing I'd ever lived in. But it was home for a year. And it was, let's just put it quite frankly, it was right on, pretty much stepping on campus in Montreal. So downtown. And I believe the rent was something in the neighborhood of $400 or $500 a month. I'm going to guess that would be $800 a month now for that same little tiny place. 22 years later, it would have doubled in price, which is insane. As I said, this was not an apartment appropriate for even two people to live in. It was really a single person apartment. I think I had people over like 2 times when I lived there because there was no room. I moved into an apartment after that in 2003 kind of a more large-scale apartment complex a couple blocks away, where I had a studio, and this was 500 or 600 square feet. Anyways, the little kit that had a. I mean, listen, it's a studio apartment. There was one big room, but it was set up such that the bathroom was like a little ensuite next to where you would put your bed. There was a little kitchen area, and at least when you walked in the door, you weren't looking right into the bedroom. There was area to put a couch, for example. That was $800 a month, I think. But that apartment complex came with amenities like there was security, there was access to an underground shopping area with a gym, not the apartment building's gym, a private gym, but basically I lived those years. I lived there in that apartment for like 3 years, and then I found a roommate. We lived in a much bigger apartment in the same complex for a year. So I lived there a total of 4 years. In the winter, unless I was going to class or to a friend's place or out, I didn't need to leave. Even to do the groceries, I didn't need to go outside. Massive convenience. Had underground parking, which you paid for, obviously, but, that place was $800. I remember when we moved when I got the roommate for a year, and we moved into a 2-story, 2-bedroom. So it was a downstairs and upstairs apartment with a balcony, kitchen, 2 bathrooms, 2 bedrooms, living room, all that jazz. I remember that was $1,800 a month, and I remember, wow, that is some very high rent, which we split. But man, like that apartment today would be like $2,500 or $2,800. Like rent is unbelievable now. Like it's unaffordable. I'm listening to the young people that I work with at my job, because I'm one of the old farts there, and the rent they're paying is astronomical. I don't understand how they afford it. And the thing is that it's okay if prices go up so long as wages go up, but the wages haven't gone up. Starting wage now doesn't smack much differently of what I was earning back in 2006 as a new grad. Kids these days aren't earning that much more, but they're asked to pay your rent that's 40, 50, 60, 100% higher than what I was paying. So that's just the rental market. Now, granted that there are some terrible landlords, there are terrible tenants. It's not a great relationship. There's a power dynamic there. Tenants in Montreal have a lot more staying power if they're bad, dishonest people than landlords. But landlords can also be pretty terrible about repairing things, making good living arrangements, making an apartment livable that isn't a roach motel. There's terrible ones there. Those recently in the news, not in Montreal, but just an innocent tenant paying his landlord rent. His landlord was a non-resident, and that non-resident landlord was supposed to pay withholding tax to Canada, didn't for 6 years, and the Canada Revenue Agency, which for you Americans is the equivalent of the IRS, went against the tenant for those unpaid withholding taxes, which is insane to me. You would think that the lease contract would shield a tenant from the tax liabilities of the landlord's rental income. But it didn't, which is, and apparently that's only because the CRA found it too difficult to chase down the non-resident. I mean, in my mind, the CRA should have just put a lien on the property, and that's it. Any transaction that then goes through on that property, there's whatever it is, $100,000 or $50,000 of tax to pay with interest and penalties. That's removed and remitted to the government. That's it. I don't know why you would assess against the tenant. It seems blatantly unfair, and I hope the tenant appealed, because it's absolutely ridiculous. But it was upheld in court, and that's why I'm saying I hope they appealed, because it was upheld in court. I can't believe a judge signed that. Anywho, and I'm an accountant. Anywho, you know, property in the last 30 years in Canada has gone up by 500%. Just in the last 15 years, my house, which is a small detached home in the near suburbs of Montreal, so I do have a very, very desirable location. I am not far from downtown Montreal, but I'm also close to everything that the suburbs can provide. I live in a good area. I'm walking distance from a school. It's a 3-minute walk to the local light rail station, the new one called the REM in Montreal that takes you downtown. I'm a 3-minute walk from that new station. I've got 2 grocery stores in walking distance, and I do mean walking distance, as in 5 minutes for one, 15 minutes for the other, 12 minutes for the other, walking. It's 90 seconds driving for one and a minute and a half for the other. I'm walking distance from my gym, a pharmacy, a couple of restaurants, a computer store. Like, there's a mall at the end of my street. That's perfect. I have a very large commercial complex called the 1030, or in French they call it Discount, the intersections of Highway 10 and 30. This large outdoor area that was built up with a huge movie theater, an entertainment theater, so not like a movie theater, but like a real theater for shows. Many restaurants, lots of stores. They have a Best Buy, a Walmart, an Apple store, all the stuff is about a 7-minute drive. 3 minutes from my house, I have another shopping center. And like I said, I live in an area that basically within 3 minutes of driving or 4 minutes of driving in clear traffic, I can be on the Champlain Bridge that takes me to downtown Montreal. My location is unreal. I'm not a huge fan of my house. I have about 1,000 square feet, not counting the basement. It's a bit small. I'm a bit of a pack rat. I would love to have a bigger house. I would love to have a 2-garage house because I would love to justify to myself that I have room for a second car. That's more fun. Cadillac problems. But I find it very difficult to displace myself from my location. The house is getting older. It's 50 years old now, or a little over 50 years old. I am up maintaining the house. I redid the bathrooms. I've redone the deck. I redid the roof. But my house is worth double what I bought it for in 15 years. And that, to me, while great for me, because it gives me a certain amount of equity, a regular family making regular income in Canada could not afford to buy my house. They couldn't. I could afford it back when it was for sale. They can't afford it now. If they don't have the down payment, a large down payment, the mortgage would be too much. So I don't know how people are doing it, and I live in Montreal, where the problem is 50% of that of, let's say, Toronto or Vancouver. Where there, unless you're, basically making money hand over fist or have a trust fund, you're not buying property anywhere within an hour radius of those cities by car. Now, I heard, Bill Maher say that it's because we let in, so many people from other parts of the world too quickly into Canada that housing couldn't keep up. Conservative politicians will tell you because there's too many barriers to entry, to purchasing, or to building, that, permits, cities are too slow to get permits, bureaucracy is too thick to get development done. My feeling has always been that it's not people coming to the country. It's not, I would say it's probably a permit issue, but it's also a foreign investment issue, that people have taken the United States to a lesser degree, Canada to a much higher degree, as being a place where they can cheaply park money that they don't want. And I understand the rationale. Some people have come from countries where the political setup is such that the government could seize your assets at any time without warning and without reason. They could just take the money and say, well, it's ours now. So I understand that there's a certain incentive for people in those countries that have a bit of money to protect it. And I listen to the logic. You can't protect it in stocks or bonds or foreign bank accounts. Governments will just seize that stuff. One thing they can't really seize without a land army is land. So if the money is parked in land overseas, protected by the legal statutes of that jurisdiction in your name, they may take all the stuff you have at home, but they can't take away that foreign investment. So a lot of property in our country especially got bought up by foreign investors, and that led to a drive up in price. And the other thing that I've heard some people poo-poo on this a little bit, but the other thing is people live longer. So where property used to turn hands at an average age of 75 or 80, people are living in their homes till 90 now. It's an extra decade of needs for housing for people. And couple that with the fact that the baby boomers are a very disproportionately large part of the population versus all the other demographics. Versus any other time in history. We have more seniors now than we ever have, proportionally. And they need homes. And generally, because of the way things were set up, they bought their homes very cheap, and they have very little incentive to leave their homes because the homes are fully paid. They've lived there for 30 years. They have no intention of moving unless health forces them to move. So, of course, there's a housing crisis. It's led to such inflationary pricing, I think, that while there is a real crisis, I think things have overstated themselves in places like Toronto and Vancouver. I think a lot of stuff was bought on speculation because of cheap interest. And now that the tides have turned on the interest a year and a half ago, people can't afford them. And that's this leading to this correction that we're seeing where rates went up, prices are coming down, and some people are upside down on their payments. So, a crisis. One thing I do agree with, I would say, is that I think there needs to be the building of more homes, 100%. I don't think we can allow developers I'm a big supporter of a free market, but developers have thus far shown very little interest for long-term needs versus short-term gain, right? They're not in the business of long-term needs. So I won't blame the developers. That's unfair. The developers are going to do what's in their best interest and what they're legally required. Cities, municipal politics, which everybody kind of says is the most, I guess, clown school level of politics, which is to a certain degree true, but it's the most important. They decide zoning in these municipalities. They've made such catastrophic errors in how they grant zoning, when they grant zoning, the bureaucracy required. They've basically made any decision that brings in more city taxes immediately, that's the one they went with. There has been very little thought to social housing, needs for low-income housing, supporting those initiatives. There has been little to no support for making sure that proper infrastructure is in place The classic, if you build it, they will come, has just been ignored, right? Near where my parents live, so in that neighborhood where my parents are, there was one school when they moved there in 2001. And it was an older older. I mean, the demographic in that neighborhood was generally older, and there wasn't really a large young family contingent in that area because the houses were bigger. There was less densification, if you will. And so one school was okay. Fast forward, 15 years, they've built hundreds of new homes in that area, which great. They got through the development part. They built what the demand could support. They built a lot of semi-detached housing, some apartments. Some big businesses moved their, like Bell, for example, moved their corporate office there. And commercially, they were supported. There was a mall that had 2 large grocery stores, large pharmacy. There was gym, blah, blah, blah. But the one thing they didn't do, in all of the land that they had given up to developers for these hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of new homes, no one set aside a couple tens of thousands of square feet to build a school or a clinic. I just think of like playing SimCity as a kid, and didn't you need to properly diversify your little city to make it work and your citizens happy? So my parents live on one of what I would call the sub-islands of the island of Montreal. It's a place called Nuns Island. So Nuns Island is an island. If you're going to get anywhere else, you have to find one of the few routes off of Nuns Island, because everything to get off the island requires a bridge. Bridges are expensive. You can't build 40 of them. So if you want to go to a clinic, if you want to go to any government office or anything like that, you have to go generally to Verdun, which is kind of the same neighborhood, but it is over a bridge to get there. And in the schooling situation, what they did was, originally that neighborhood was really well, they had a good green space, a lot of parkland, and that's great. And you listen, people paid for that because the property value was high and the city taxes were high. But when they built all these new subdivisions, they had to build a new school, and they took half of a park to do it. Like, it wouldn't have made a material difference to not build 10 or 15 houses and to then basically pay a developer off and basically take some land back to build a school. But cities don't think like that. I think of another place, a small township near Montreal, about a 45-minute drive away from Montreal, called Bromont, where, again, the city got greedy. Somebody had these delusions of grandeur that Bromont, which has a ski hill, there's Mont Bromont. It's got its own little ski hill, but it's not nearly what Tremblant is, and it hasn't developed like Tremblant has. Somebody thought that Bromont would be the next Tremblant, and it grew, but they built hundreds of condos, and nobody bought them. I think people are buying them now. I think there's some densification, not densification, but there's now some, at one point I think Beaumont was a city of 15,000, or a town of 15,000 people, and there were 170 condos for sale. And basically people were fire selling them because there was so much supply for virtually no demand. I think now it's a little bit better. But yeah, they built and they built and they built with at an uncontrolled pace, and kind of was a bit disastrous when it came out, you know? You really had to sit on that property long term to see any sort of reward on it. I know my own first property I bought was an ex apartment building that had been by the landlord. The landlord and I, we had done some pretty deep homework after the fact, but the landlord, we believe, had realized the repair costs. It was a 4 or 5 story building. He had realized the repair costs that he needed to invest into the maintenance of this building that had been built in the 70s. Well over $1 million that he would have had to put in to repair the communal air conditioning and heating and the roof and the this and the that and the other thing. And he just said, forget it. I'm not putting the money in. What I'll do is I'll sell the apartments to the apartment renters. And that's what he did. He flipped it into, he gave every renter an opportunity to own. They didn't know how, they were renters. And we're not talking like young people. We're talking people that had for decades been renting. They'd never owned property, and suddenly they owned property. They had no idea what they were doing. Thought that they could manage their own building and managed it into ruin. Well, not ruin. Like, the apartment was nice, but they had no money. And on that transaction, I lost money. I bought it because it was cheap. It had the right, fit for me. But in the 2 years I owned it, it made bupkis. It made no cash. So housing is a difficult one. It's a tough cookie to crack, but I'll come back to the beginning where I'm just lucky I got into the market when I did, because nowadays I can't even imagine the stress I would be under trying to own something. So if you got your houses, give it a little hug.